Oh, y'all think you're so funny, don't ya? You think you can just waltz into my clearly for jokes voting poll and just mess with everything this time. Y'all think you're a bunch of clever Dans out there, don't ya? You want me to review my crippling depression? Really? You want me to throw in every other mental disorder I've been diagnosed with? Is that what you want? Because I don't think you do. Alright? I'll give you a quick review of the crippling depression in particular. 0 out of 10. Worst thing ever. Actually not. That's actually not the worst thing I've ever been diagnosed with. Look! That was obviously a dark bit of humor from me. And obviously, you tried to call my bluff on that. So, okay. I can't even be really that mad because y'all did exactly what I would have done if I was in your situation. So, I'm gonna let it go. And just for you, I'm gonna actually make a real review about a real thing that I can really actually review. So we're gonna choose the second most popular vote in the poll, which is Resident Evil 4. Now here's the thing about me and Resident Evil 4. Well, let's talk about the backstory behind Resident Evil. I've talked about Resident Evil in the past, a lot actually. And, you know, I have reviewed the original game as well as its HD remake, and some people get the impression that I don't like Resident Evil for whatever reason, and that's not fair, because I absolutely love Resident Evil. The vast majority of the games I have enjoyed in every conceivable way. I mean, they're a quintessential horror series. It's one of the icons of the survival horror genre. I was in no way trying to throw shade towards it in my initial review. If I came off that way, well, that wasn't on purpose. My issues with the original game aside, you have to remember I played the version on the GameCube first. So I wasn't there for the original game and what it did for the PlayStation in general, and horror in general, frankly. And because I played the version of the GameCube first, of course I'm gonna be partial to that. It was the first Resident Evil game I ever played. And then I played Zero. And then I played RE4. But here's the thing about me and RE4.
Hey.
What are you... Fenris, what are we doing here? Is this a... What is this?
I don't know, I'm on the radio.
I don't have a radio. I don't think I do.
Don't you?
No, I don't. I think... You can't... What are you doing here? You can't just show up just when you feel like it. It's not normal.
Yeah, I thought you'd need some help.
Help? Oh, you think I need help? On my channel that I've run by myself forever? You think I just walk in and do that? I know I need some help of the mental variety, but not with this. Just some mental assistance.
I mean, we all need that every once in a while.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about it. Look. You can't just be here, all right? You can't just show up. You think you're better than me with your socialist utopia or whatever you got? Yeah.
It's not as utopian as you think.
Canada!
It makes me question why!
Okay, so apparently I don't get to do this by myself, but I want you to realize that this is all happening completely under duress, and under protest, okay? Okay. RE4. Here's the thing about RE4 and me. We have never really gotten on. Does that make any sense? It probably doesn't help that when RE4 was released, I was going through my high school brooding phase, as opposed to my adult brooding phase, which is apparently completely different. And RE4 was mega popular. If you weren't there, maybe you don't remember, but RE4 was a sensation when it was released. It revitalized the Resident Evil series as a whole at the time. It was revolutionary in terms of what it did. It's almost because of what it did that I have issues with it. When I played it, it was not nearly this perfect god amongst mere games that people made it out to be, at least not from where I stood.
An important thing to take into consideration when I sing this game's praises and herald it as one of my favorites is that I didn't have the same experiences with Resident Evil games prior to 4 that Darkness had. In fact, 4 was not only my entry point into the series, but really into survival horror and horror media in general. I was not a brave kid growing up. I wasn't allowed, nor did I like horror films. Before Resident Evil 4, the scariest stuff I was into was Castlevania and Goosebumps. And now, considering I'm quite the horror fanatic in my private time, to say this game was influential would be an understatement. That said, my fondness for it has admittedly softened towards it since that first playthrough, and I'm not blind to its faults, but I have to pay respect to it for that.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way, because, like I said, I played the Resident Evil original remake on the GameCube first, and Zero. Both those games are very, very, very close to what the original game was, as well as 2 and 3 on the PlayStation for that matter, in terms of the classic tank controls and the isolation, the weird camera angles. Like, it's all there, just dolled up in a much more vivid style. I think they're even scarier than the originals as a result. RE4 comes down and is like, hey guys, remember all that horror and stuff? Yeah, it's still here, but we're gonna throw it in the blender with an action game. And it's like, okay, question? Why? I mean, I'm not complaining about RE4 being different, because at the time, I do believe that the series needed RE4 to be different. Had they made another game in those same tank-style controls, people would have complained. The control scheme needed an overhaul. That's not the problem. Let's talk about things I like first, because I don't think RE4 is a bad game at all. I just think it's overrated.
The thing is, Resident Evil 4 kind of redefined the third-person shooter genre. Yes, they existed before it. Tomb Raider, Mega Man Legends, Siphon Filter, even Max Payne all predate it, but the over-the-shoulder aiming perspective that has been imitated since all started here.
Now you might be saying, well, that makes it better, right? It's easier to shoot, it's easier to aim. It's one of the best systems in terms of aiming outside of an FPS, and yes, you're correct. The over-the-shoulder view was revolutionary, without question. This is an excellent system for an action game. In fact, it would be copied by several games in the future, notably Dead Space and Gears of War. It was such a cool idea, and it worked really well for the game because it still didn't feel so distant from the original Resident Evil to feel as alien as it could have. Except, in some ways, it does feel kind of alien. See, a big problem I have with RE4 is that, well, okay, you're not fighting zombies, and I get that. And that's fine. You're fighting the Los Illuminados, which is this cult that follows this parasite that's in their bodies called the Las Plagas. So instead of a virus, it's a parasite, which is a neat jump. I like the differentiation in terms of what affliction is causing the horror. So it opens up a door for a whole new list of ideas, and I'm okay with that. And it does mean that you're not technically fighting zombies. You're fighting, crazed villagers who have this parasite in them. But my problem with this is that people are like, oh, they're so much faster and, and smarter than zombies. And I'm like, are they? Not really. I mean, they do things zombies can't, like, use weapons. But for the most part, they still shamble around and just kind of stalk you like zombies do. Like, their speed is not nearly what you would expect from an actual mob of people rushing you. Like, rarely do they run. And in fact, it's only towards the tail end of the game that they actually start using guns. Like, it's like they wanted to do something different with the style overall, but like stopped short because they were afraid to make the game too hard or too alien. I don't know, it's like they were caught in this middle where they're like, do we want to make it like that, or what?
Yeah, even I have to admit, coming back to Resident Evil 4 after several years, the controls took a little getting used to again. And I've played through this game to completion at least 3 times. Fortunately, they are adjustable, but I made a point to play with the intended control scheme, and after thinking about it, I kind of get it. Because Leon stands in place while aiming, you only really need to use one stick for both moving and aiming. In a way, it's more simplified. But we've just been programmed to aim with the right stick for a decade now, and it feels just weird. 16 years ago, the controls were groundbreaking. Now they're already antiquated. As for the moving while not shooting thing, I'm going to defend this. And don't worry, Dead Space fans, I still think your game is still scary enough in plenty of other ways, but I actually think this design leads more to the intensity of Resident Evil 4. Let me explain. Aiming in Resident Evil 4 not only plants you in place, but it zooms you in at what you're focused on and cuts off a lot of your peripheral vision. Because the new enemies are programmed to surround and get behind you, if you get too comfortable standing in place too long, shooting at a crowd of enemies, you run the risk of getting stabbed in the back. Thus, you need to know when to move and when to stop and shoot.
The rain in Spain falls mainly on the plains. I get that. But, I feel like Spaniards in 2005 probably dressed a bit better, even in a rural community, than what are clearly 1930s outfits. Like how isolated is this village that it has not, aged a day in the span of a century? I mean, you go through a creepy castle with suits of armor and medieval flails. Like, what? Where? These are museum pieces. This doesn't exist. I refuse to acknowledge that. And I know you're saying, but it's a fantasy setting. It's Resident Evil. Are you really taking it seriously? Yeah, I kind of am, because the previous games, as campy as the voice acting was, were very down to earth and clearly took place in a world that was modeled after our real one. But RE4 does a lot of weird stuff that just doesn't seem to fit. And don't even start on collecting items in this game. Collecting items is fine, but you do it a lot. Compared to previous games where, yeah, you were collecting items all the time, but items were a real luxury. Like, it was rare to find a thing, and when you got a thing, you were like, oh my god, it's a thing! I need to keep this thing and make sure I don't lose it, because I have only 8 inventory slots, and I can't get any more. And it's very mission critical. But here, they've completely updated the interface to be more in line with an action game where you're getting a lot of stuff. And the inventory system is way expanded. And it's arguably one of the best inventory systems ever seen in any game, period, because, yeah, in terms of space, it makes a lot more sense from a logical perspective.
I do like 4's inventory system for its questionable realism, and that a chicken egg does not take up the same amount of inventory space as a rocket launcher, but unlike other survival horror and past Resident Evil games, by the end of 4, you have so much inventory space, and depending on your skill level, have probably picked up so many items, it becomes far less about managing the resources you have, and more about deciding what to keep and what to sell or throw away.
But it does require another level of management that wasn't there in the original games, and it takes time sometimes to sort through things. The game will auto-sort sometimes, but sometimes you also run into a situation where the game says you don't have enough room, but you can look at it and say, if I rearrange this and turn this sideways and turn this upside down and to do this and do that, suddenly I can make space for it. And some people are really gonna like that, but I thought it was more convoluted. I just preferred the simplicity of just putting it in my inventory and not thinking about it, because I have way more to worry about right now. There's a horde of infected Spaniards that are trying to stab me, alright? I don't have time to try to force this random potted plant into my attaché case with my rocket launcher, and all of this somehow fits in a handheld case. Like, either make it make sense or make it don't make sense, because trying to make it make sense while it still doesn't make sense doesn't make sense. But back to the fear element, it's way more of an action game, and part of the reason I don't like 4 very much is that I feel like it's 4's fault that Resident Evil took this turn, this wild, misdirected turn down an action route. Suddenly, every game after this seemed more focused on the combat than the actual horror elements, which is annoying to me because it's not like 4 didn't have its creepy moments. There were plenty of times in 4 that were scary. Is it less scary than previous Resident Evil games? Yes, absolutely, without question. But there are times where it's like, oh, that's creepy. Oh, that's disturbing. Oh, I got no time for this. And then there was this one part of the game that just legit freaked me out, and I just can't deal with it. You run into a regenerator and...
Oh, come on. The regenerators aren't that scary. You get the thermal scope, you take out the parasites. It's not the regenerators themselves, dead.
Part.
Boom.
Creep. But it's the aesthetic, the area. There's not a lot of light in it. You know? There's not that much light there, and it's hard to see.
Wait. Are you afraid of the dark?
No!
Your name's Darkness!
I am aware of what my name is! Thank you! Okay?
Wait, are you afraid of yourself?
Oh dear. think he's on to you.
Hey, hello? Josh? Darkness? You there? Man, seriously, this is kind of ridiculous, you being afraid of
Fenris,
yourself.
you have to listen to me. You
or
have
the
to listen
darkness.
to me.
Oh, hey, hi, yes, hello.
Fenris!
You're here.
Fenris, I know you're not real. I know you're just a stuffed animal.
What?
But I need you to listen to me, and I need you to help me out, because I don't know what to do about what's going on in my head.
Dude, you just cut out for a second. What happened?
No, you didn't see him. He was there. No one else sees him but me.
What the f*** are you talking about?
And yeah, I mentioned regenerators. There are other enemy types in this game, but I also feel like that's where the game kind of falls flat. Most of the time, you're just fighting the villagers. Like, there's nothing, weird, exciting in terms of the bioweapons that we usually see in Resident Evil. Like, outside of the villagers, it's either just stronger versions of villagers, or these bugs, these giants that you fight twice, 3 times if you count the fact you fight 2 of them at the same time, which was horrifying, by the way, so I'll give it that. And the regenerators, which are legitimately scary, and I don't like dealing with them. But other than that, I feel like there could be more variety in terms of who I'm fighting. I mean, it is an action game, but ultimately most of the fights wind up being very similar. And this game is pretty long. Resident Evil 4 has a lot to offer in terms of its length, but I'm not sure it has a lot to offer in terms of its variety during the length. So if you're not that into the game from the get-go, you probably won't be that into the game later. It does have its tense moments, and a big part of the horror element of 4, I feel, is the claustrophobic crowd situation. There are just more enemies on the screen. Usually in the other Resident Evil games, you might take on 1 or 2 zombies at a time, tops, or another enemy. Here, it's upwards of a dozen, if not more at times. There's a lot to worry about. You can get caught from behind, you can get caught from the front, from the side, many enemies throw projectiles. It's a lot different in that regard, and that can be very scary, especially if you don't like people. In that regard, it can be very traumatizing. It definitely is very tense. It gets your blood pumping, because there's a lot of situations where it's like, oh goodness, 1 versus 18, yeah, I got this. Oh, 1 has a chainsaw that will instantly cut my head off? Excellent, wonderful, I'm so glad I'm in this situation. But that brings me to the plot and narrative of this game, and I just can't get over this. Okay, people really like the story, and to be fair, it's not a bad story at all. The Lost Plagas is a really interesting idea, it's executed really well, and I like learning about it. I love the lore of Resident Evil, and I love the lore of the Lost Plagas. But my problem with the Plagas and everything in RE4 pretty much is outside of the fact that Leon is in it as the main character, Ada shows up, working for Wesker, who's interested in the Lost Plagas. Beyond that, this has nothing to do with the story of Resident Evil up until now.
Being my entry point into the series, I can't say I really let the fact that it was so loosely related to the other games bother me, as not only did I have 0 frame of reference, but it still had just a loose enough connection and planted enough seeds and questions that this game single-handedly turned me into a Resident Evil fan. It made me want to play more games, read the novels, and just learn more about its world and story. Heck, I didn't even dislike the movies as offensive as those were.
It's got nothing to do with the overall story. In fact, I think Code Veronica had more to do with the core story of Resident Evil and had more critical plot elements than 4 ever does at any point. The only thing it really does concrete that really affects Resident Evil 5 is introducing the Lost Plagas as an element. Beyond that, this has no bearing on anything going on in the rest of the series, so why isn't this a spin-off? No, it's RE4. Is it good? Well, yes, but when I'm playing Resident Evil 4, I kind of expect a story that carries over from the previous games. And when what we have is effectively a side piece that, while still good on its own, doesn't really have that much to do with the overall narrative we're working with in the rest of the games, because mind you, we hadn't really gotten any solid conclusion to Umbrella or Wesker or anything going on in the first 3 games, it just feels like it's stalling in that regard. It doesn't help that part of my reason I can't be scared of this game very often is Leon himself. Now, my thing with Leon in this game is this. It's not that I don't like Leon. He's usually pretty good. Most of the games he's in, I like him. He's fine. He was pretty good in RE2. But Leon in this game doesn't feel like Leon in any of the other games. And Leon is just he's an action hero. And my problem with that is this. Alright, when it comes to a horror game, a big part of playing a horror game, if the protagonist you're playing as speaks, they need to be relatable in some way to make you realize that, wow, this stuff is very traumatic and traumatizing. It's not just you, the player, getting freaked out. The person you're supposed to relate to and be with and play as also needs to get freaked out by the situation, right? I thought the other Resident Evil games handled that very well. Yeah, you were playing as Elite Stars operatives, a special unit in the Raccoon City Police Department, so already they're a bit out there. But they reacted to things in a way that felt more like they were, oh, I don't know, scared and human. Like, yeah, all this stuff going on, you'd be freaked out too. In RE2, it was Leon's first day on the job. I think Claire was a college student, and suddenly there's zombies consuming flesh in front of them. Yeah, they got scared, because that's a normal human reaction, and it helps ground you in the fact that this is a dire situation, and fear is a proper emotion to feel. Leon doesn't get scared one time in this game. Ever. Even when he is full license to, and no one would blame him for it, he never shows any out of fear. He's more like an action hero. He's always doing these weird stunts, and to be fair, he is a secret agent in this game, so I'll give him that. But he's always like quipping one-liners. Like, he comes across more like James Bond or something than anything else. He doesn't act like a person should. Even when he is knowingly infected with a parasitic organism in his chest, that's not a spoiler, that happens like immediately. He still is like, yeah, it's all good, we'll just get it out. Like, are you not freaking concerned? This thing is eating you. It is going to usurp control of your body. It is going to take over your mind. It's inside you. Do you remember the Alien series? Whenever anyone was like infected with the alien, it would like burst out of their chest, and that's really freaky and horrifying and like the worst thing to imagine, that there is a parasitic organism inside of you consuming your very being. Leon's like the chillest person about this. What?
As a teenager, I thought Leon was the coolest, and to this day, I still like him, even in this game, but coming back to it, I kinda think they made Devil May Cry out of the first build of this game, and then forgot to remove Dante's personality.
And I'm not saying he doesn't have his moments. I think he handles the fact that this is a hostage rescue situation really well. And I understand that maybe from that perspective, he has to remain grounded so he doesn't freak Ashley out. Yes, I should probably mention that. This is a sort of a partially escort mission game, where you have to lead Ashley, the president's daughter, around and save her from the enemies. And okay, I get that. And I'm not even gonna complain about that, because to be brutally honest, I don't mind Ashley, and I think in terms of an escort mission game, for one thing, you don't do that terribly often. For two, even when you do, it actually is one of the best executed occasions where that occurs. Like, Ashley is so easy to deal with. Stop, follow, that's it. Those are only two things she does. And if she's following you, she's almost always immediately behind you. If you have to aim behind her, she will automatically duck underneath your fire. I've never seen a game handle an escort situation as good as RE4 does it. So I'm not gonna complain about that. What I will complain about is that Ashley doesn't really get freaked out by the situation, even though she's infected too. You are a college student. You are a spoiled politician daughter. It's okay to scream. It's fine. You might say, that just shows how strong the characters are. This isn't normal. This isn't how normal people react. This is classic clinical psychopathic behavior where empathy doesn't exist and emotions don't exist. Like, this is, like, alarming. I honestly think Dead Space 3, for all that game's flaws, because it has a lot of them, actually handled this better. Because Isaac has some issues. The dude is alcoholic, angry, and just an emotional, mental disaster. But considering all the horrific things he's seen, it actually makes more sense and made him feel more real as a character. I thought Dead Space 3 handled that so well. And a lot of modern horror games are going this route, trying to make these characters more human. Once you've seen these things, you don't necessarily get desensitized, you get messed up in the head. But the idea of Leon here is like, oh yeah, well, seen one monster, seen them all. I went to Raccoon City, it's pretty traumatic, but it's all good, babe. I'm just gonna fight this giant fish here, Yeah, it's a normal day in the life of a secret agent spy, whatever. It's all good. It's all good. Oh, what? I'm infected with a brain parasite that's gonna completely usurp control of my entire being and make me loyal to this crazy religious maniac? Yeah, no, it's fine. I'll deal with it. Chill. Like, it's just doesn't make sense from a psychological perspective. I can't connect with Leon. You can say, well, he's cool, and yeah, you can say that. And maybe at the time, that was normal. But I plead with you, Resident Evil is not an action game, or it's not supposed to be. It's a horror game from the start. So it seems reasonable to expect a horrific reaction from your protagonist. And when Leon isn't scared of what's going on around him, why should I be? That being said, visually, I have basically nothing to say. I mean, yeah, the visuals don't look good by today's standards, but what is it? What am I saying? The game came out in 2005. It's been 16 years. Of course the visuals haven't stood the test of time. Don't be ridiculous. For the time, RE4 looked amazing. Like, really, genuinely amazing. Like, visually, there were no complaints at all when it came to RE4. It was pushing all the consoles it came out on back then.
Yeah, I don't have too much to say about the visuals. Yeah, the textures looked aged, and they are, and the character models look unrealistic for a 16-year-old game that ran on a GameCube and a PS2. But its characters are still distinct, the setting feels real and lived in, despite me not knowing where the hell in Spain we're supposed to be, and its monsters and body horror still look really gross.
But overall, I just feel like it's responsible for the downturn the series had for a while there, ultimately leading to Resident Evil 6, and I bet you don't like that, do ya? No, you don't. Nobody liked 6. Well, a few people did. But people who liked it as an action game, because that's my problem. Resident Evil turned into an action series for a while, and I just didn't want that. I don't mind new mechanics. I don't mind new ideas. I don't mind a different control system, because all that's fine. What I mind is losing the original major element that made the series what it was. Survival horror. And RE4 started the trend away from that. It still retains a lot of those elements. There are times where I just straight up ran out of ammo and had to run. That doesn't happen in any of the other games past this, until 7 at least. And there were a few times where I was genuinely scared, but overall, it's more of an action game feeling than the previous ones. It's a classic, it always will be, and it has a massive fan base around it. And even now it's getting remade again into a VR game, which, hey, why not? It's a good game. I'm never gonna say it's a bad game. Mind you, none of my critiques change that. It's a great game to play. It's fun, but I just feel like it's not the quintessential Resident Evil game compared to the others. I vastly prefer the more recent remakes, if I'm being honest. They still retain that over-the-shoulder view, but they're more in line with what I expect from Resident Evil. But ultimately, would I recommend 4? Yeah, I would. Still fun. They still got plenty of things to like about it. But I guess what I'm trying to say throughout all of this is don't go in expecting this brilliant masterpiece of a game that's perfect in every way and has absolutely no flaws and is exactly what Resident Evil needs to be forever, because wow, not that at all. But still, good game. Worth playing if you haven't. Although who hasn't played RE4 these days? It's been on like every platform imaginable. Come on. Just do something. I don't know. Just get off YouTube. Go outside. Whatever. Till next time, this is Darkness, and I bid you all a fond farewell.